I arrived at Sintra by train, and just along from the station was the impressive town hall built in 1910. A little further on was my first glimpse of the palace. This Moorish fountain supplied the town's water from 1922. I went mainly for the palaces and castle, but Sintra itself is an interesting town. My first visit was to the National Palace of Sintra, which is the oldest palace in Portugal. Its arches nicely framed the town and the hilltop Moorish castle. The great hall of the palace was named the Swan Room, after the 30 images on the ceiling. The Coats of Arms room has heraldic shields representing 72 of the most noble Portuguese households, with that of King Manuel I in the centre. The azulejo tiles below depicted scenes of gallantry. The magpies on this ceiling were the motto of King John I. This is the Golden Chamber, although its original gilding has been lost with time. The collection of plates were on the galley room, named after its ceiling paintings. This is the bedroom of King Ferdinand II. The palace kitchens lie below the twin iconic chimneys. The patio led onto the garden terrace with views of the Moorish castle towering above the town. My next venue was to be to the castle, standing some 200 metres higher than the town. So for me it was onwards and upwards. Every bakery has a version of the popular custard tart. Lord Byron was impressed with the town when he briefly visited. The trail I was to follow was about 2.5 kilometres long, initially with view back to the town. Halfway up was the Villa Sassetti, built in 1890 for a Lisbon hotelier. The path wound past giant boulders known as glacial erratics. There was a lot of climbing, but it was well shaded. Finally, I reached the unassuming entry point. The castle was originally constructed in the 9th century, with major restoration work constructed by the king in the 19th century. It is part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The massive ramparts provided fantastic lookout points. After the long climb up the hill, there was plenty more clambering still to do to get to its various defensive towers. The King's Tower was one of the highest points and provided a view of Penna Palace, standing proud on its own pinnacle.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
In all, the castle has 450 metres of battlements and towers. Next, I entered the vast gardens of the Penna Palace, using the valley of the lake's gate. The mini Moorish castles on the lakes are duck houses. There were a number of buildings dotted round the grounds, including the original estate stables. This pergola bridge led me to the Countess of Edla villa, which dated from 1869. Its mock alpine chalet style was typical of the period, but it had an unusual cork decoration. King Ferdinand II had married the Countess after the death of his first wife. Returning through the pergola, I followed signs for the palace. The trees have grown up so much that viewpoints of the palace are limited. The 200 hectares of forest has a labyrinth of crisscrossing pathways, and it could easily take 2 or 3 hours walking to fully explore. The palace was built for Don Fernando II, starting in 1838. The chapel of Our Lady of Penna is tiny and is one of the oldest buildings on the site, having been originally part of a convent. The palace is a very popular venue for tourists, and time slots for entering the building itself have to be booked days in advance. Possibly because of the crowds, internal photography is not allowed, but there are excellent 360-degree internal shots viewable on the official website. I will provide a link to it in the description. Don Fernando was known as the Artist King, which may account for the palace's eclectic mixture of styles. The Sintra hills can frequently get covered in a veil of mist, which is a characteristic of the area. This regular dampness must to an extent account for the less than pristine appearance of the palace walls. As the clouds rolled over, heavy rain started, and so I jumped into a tuk-tuk for my return down to the train station.